The learning should be a protection for everyone that needs. We're going to start from Pei Gimel by the Mishnah. That's towards the top of the page, 83a. Talking about the Korban Pesach, there's a slight problem with eating the Korban Pesach, and that is that you're not allowed to break a bone. And inside the bones there's meat. And you're also not allowed to, there's marrow. You're also not allowed to leave over anything from the Korban Pesach. Anything that gets left over has to be burned. Now you have an inherent problem because there's marrow that you can't get to. So that marrow is never going to be able to be eaten. It's always going to need to be burned. So here the Mishnah starts off with Hatzames that have marrow inside. They're going to need to be burned. There's no question. Next thing is Gidin. Gidin are the sinews. The Gemara is going to discuss what's going on. Are they edible or are they not edible? If they're edible, why didn't you eat them? If they're not edible, so why do you have to burn them? We'll see in the Gemara on number basis. Hanaisar is anything that was left over. They didn't finish the whole thing. All of these is Yisrafu B'Shisha Asar. They have to be burned on the 16th, not on the 15th. You have to wait an extra day. The Gemara is going to discuss that maybe the assay of burning it should push off the Hilchas Yom Tov. We'll see on the base. Chaltas Ayilnius B'Shabbos. Let's say the 16th is actually Shabbos. So this year, the 14th is Shabbos. So if Pesach itself was on a Friday, Erev Pesach was a Thursday, and the first day Chol Hamoed in Eretz Yisrael, one day Yom Tov, first day Chol Hamoed would be Shabbos. So then Yisruf would be a Zayin. You can't burn the leftover Korban Pesach on Yom Tov, which that's the 15th. That's Friday. You can't burn it on the 16th because that's Shabbos. And you have to wait till the 17th to burn it. Because the burning of Kachin doesn't push off Shabbos or Yom Tov. Okay. Amar of Mari Baravu, Amar of Yitzchak. If Mari Baravu says the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, Katsamis Kachin, Sheshimsur Neiser. Neiser is leftover meat. If I have a bone that served the Neiser, that means it held the Neiser. Maybe the marrow is inside, maybe it was attached to it, the Neiser was attached to it. So we're jumping into like Masechta Suktzin over here. That in Masechta Suktzin you have like the piece that comes out of the apple. Does that become tamei if the apple's tamei, or it does? If the tumah touches that, does? So here we're discussing the bone that was connected to the Neiser. And we have a din derabanan. Wait a second. Someone's still there? Something just happened to my screen. Okay, well, then we have a din derabanan that Neiser is tamei. It's metamasi yadayim. It says there's Gzeres Chachamim that Neiser is metamasi yadayim. So if you touch the bone that was Shimish Neiser, that served the Neiser, that was like a yad for the Neiser, that's also tamei. So he says like this: Atzamis Kachim Shishim Neiser metamasi yadayim hol benasas basis l'davar aser. Basis l'davar aser is usually used for Hilchos Shabbos, for Muktzah or something. Usually for these types of things, it's called a yad. Anyway, that's the term. This is the term that it's using. It was a handle. It was a base. Basis is the English word base. It's the base for something that was aser, and so therefore the bone also would make the person tamei if he touches it. His hand's tamei. Name a Messiah. Let's bring a support for this from our Mishnah. It says that the bones, the sinews, and the neiser have to be burnt on the 16th. What are we talking about bones? What type of bones are we dealing with? If you say that it doesn't have any marrow, lama b'sreifa. So why do you have to burn the bones? Why do you have to burn it? There's no food there. You have to burn nicer. This isn't nicer. There's no food. Nashdinu, throw it away. Elapshi to this bumaya. It must be that there is marrow in the bone. If you say the fact that it's served nicer, that's the reason why it needs to be burnt. And then we see that shimish nicer, a yad for nicer, is actually something significant. Milsehi, it's a matter. It's something to be dealt with. Then amtulahachi, therefore by sreifa, that's why you have to burn the bone. But if you say the fact that it was a yad for nicer is nothing, so lamalu sreifa, why do you have to burn the actual bone? With perinu v'nachaltze, why don't you just break the bone open? V'nachaltze l'mayach to do, and remove the mayach, the marrow that's inside, v'nisrfei, and burn that, v'nashtin to do, and then throw out the bone. Why do you have to burn the bone? Just burn the meat, the marrow that's inside. It must be it must be that a yad, something that's a handle for nicer, is considered something, and that's why you have to burn it. It's considered like the nicer itself, and that would be a support for what Mari Barahu said, that it's metamas yadayim as well. Amri, the Gemara says that you quoted the Mishnah as a support, but the Mishnah is not necessarily a support. Like, it's not the case. Liyolam, Eimalach, really we could say Shimish Nicer Lav Milsa. The fact that it's served nicer is really nothing. That doesn't tell me that if you touch a bone, it's metamas yadayim. If you touch nicer, it's metamas yadayim. The bone isn't nicer. The kasavar bay bekashav afila bepasa. It says etzem leyishbru bay. You can't break a bone in the carbon paper. Now it has the word bay in it. So there's different opinions what the bay is coming to teach me. Here we're saying that bay in it means even if the sacrifice was possible. The Gemara says afila bepasa sal kadaita. Really? How can you say that? How can you say that even if it's possible, you can't break the bone? We have a Mishnah that says, Avala Meiser Batar. We're going to give cases of someone that doesn't incur punishment for leaving the meat over of the carbon pesach. If he leaves over when it's tahar, and for sure if he leaves over when it's tummy, Ba'ashever b'tamei, and someone that breaks a bone of an animal of the carbon pesach that was tummy, Ein Asefik Asarbai, he doesn't get malchus. I guess because there's no, because it's a lapshin b'maisa. But the point that we're bringing out is that it's really not us. Then there would be no proof for Ein Asefik Asarbai.
Do we learn from this that in other carbonot, in which all the meat must be eaten, it includes breaking the bones to eat the marrow?
Yeah, you have to break the bones.
Interesting.
It's pretty tough. Yeah. Like Shirayim.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So what are we trying to get from here? We're trying to bring out that really, we're asking, why do you have to burn the bones? Why do you have to burn the bones? So we're saying that maybe because it's a yad. So no, it's not because it's a yad. So the Gemara says, what is the reason? He says, "Bai bekasher v'afilu b'pasel." It's in the sheshbru bai. I guess it means that you're not allowed to break it you're not allowed to break the bone, even if it's. What the Gemara wanted to answer is that the reason why you have to burn the bone is you're not allowed to break the bone to get the nicer out. You're never allowed to break the bone. So that's what the Gemara's answering. The Gemara's suggestion was, if I say the bone is nothing, so then break the bone and take the marrow out and burn the marrow, because it's a lot more difficult to burn the bone than just to burn the marrow. But if I say that the bone is not allowed to be broken, even after the time of Nicer, so then how do you break it to get the marrow out? That's an interesting problem. You can't get the marrow out. It's stuck. It's there for life. So what do? You have to burn it with the marrow inside. So that's what the Gemara means. Really, the bone is nothing. I'm just not allowed to break it. The bone is not the Nicer. The Nicer is inside. The Gemara says, no, the bone is not a yad either. I just have to get to the marrow, and I have no way of doing it. At least it says maybe we can drill it or something. He says that may cause it to break. So the problem is that we quoted a Mishnah that tells us that once the carbon is puzzle, that means once it's nicer, there's no problem with breaking the bone. What are you telling me that the reason why I have to burn the bone is because you have to burn the marrow? But that problem of breaking a bone is only bekasher. Gemara says like kasher. We can resolve this in the following way. It depends. If it never had a shasa kaisha, it was never eligible. Why? Because it became tamei before the blood was sprinkled. So then the pasuk tells me at somebody says rubai v'lei b'pasel. It was never eligible. So the halachas of the carbon pesach never applied to it, that you're not allowed to break a bone. If, however, it had a time that it was eligible, and it became tummy later, it became nicer later, so then Etzem Rabbi continues forever. You can't break it. That's where we're holding right here. Who gave you that distinction? Where do you hear that there's a difference in the type of puzzle, if you're allowed to break the bone, if it was puzzle before or puzzle became puzzle later, that's going to change it? So that's Rabbi Yaakov. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yaakov. The Tanya was taught in the Brisa. It says you can't break a bone. Only the bones in a kosher sacrifice you can't break. Once it's puzzle, you're allowed to break it. Rabbi Yaakov depends. Rabbi Yaakov says it depends. If it was kosher at one point, then you're never allowed to break the bone. And if it was never kosher, then you're allowed to break the bone. Reb Shimon, right. Reb Shimon says that whether it had a shasa kosher or not, you're allowed to break the bone if it's possible. Taisus asks that Reb Shimon is the same as the Tanakama, and he gives an answer. Okay, so it's Rabbi Yaakov that makes this distinction that it depends if it was eligible at one point. Based on that distinction, now we go back to why do we have to burn the bones of in the Mishnah? The reason is because we're not able to get to the Maya. We're not able to get inside. We can't break it to get inside because this was actually eligible. This was and now that it's nicer, it doesn't change the fact that you're still not allowed to break the bone. Hey, Meisvei, the Gemara is a question. All bones of Kachin, it's referring to bones that were left over. They're nicer already. They're after the allotted time. Tunin Sreifa, they require burning. Except for bones of the carbon Pesach because of a takala that could come out from it. Takala is a stumbling. So ein tunin sreifa. All sacrifices don't need to be burnt. Ein tunin sreifa. They don't need to be burnt, except for bones of a carbon Pesach that do need to be burnt. Because bones of other sacrifices that have nicer inside have the marrow inside, so I can break the bone. But by the Korban Pesach, the Pnei Takala, this is a brisa. So the Korban Pesach, I'm not allowed to break the bone, so I have to burn it. The Gemara asks, what's the case of the bones? If you say that it doesn't have any marrow inside, so why do you have to burn it? You have to burn the bones, but you don't burn the hide, the hoofs, it's not food. Ela pshita, this must be that it has marrow inside. It has marrow inside, so then it's left over the allotted time. If you say that anything that serves the nicer is considered the nicer, and this is a yad for the nicer, so therefore I have to burn it. So the problem is, that explains the Korban Pesach, that I have to burn it. But it leaves me with the question of Atzamas Kachim, am I into Sreifa? So why don't I burn other sacrifices? I know I break the bone and get the marrow out, but so what? The bone was a yad. I had to burn the bone also. This is, now we're getting into Kimtas. Scenarios that could explain this, but it's not in every case. It's just this happened to be a specific case where it works, where it fits. We're talking about that we actually found the bones open. The bones were open. The bones were cracked open. So do you have to burn the bones? When you look at these bones, it's like archaeology. You look at these bones and you have to figure out, were these bones a yad for nicer? That means, were these bones holding the marrow after the allotted time, or were they broken beforehand and the marrow was removed? And it never became nicer. So these bones were nothing. I mean, yad for kachim, but that's not an issue. The problem is, are they a yad for nicer? So when you look at bones of kachim, we say, well, they're broken. Kami didn't have a nicer chatzino. They were probably both broken up before they became nicer because the person was religious. And religious people break bones of sacrifices to get the marrow out. All right. And it's not considered that it served the nicer. It doesn't need to be burnt. The Pesach. But what about bones of a Korban Pesach? This is interesting. No one would break a bone of a Korban Pesach. Now you see that it's open. It must have been broken after it was nicer, and it's following the opinion that holds that you're allowed to break it when it's possible. But you still have to burn it. You still have to burn it because it was a shimish nicer. It was a shimish nicer. Okay. It was broken after. It was broken after it became possible. Okay. What do we gain from here, from this teretz? We gain from this teretz that there's really no such thing as a yad for nicer. No, the opposite. There really is a yad for nicer. Why don't you burn the bones of kachim? Why don't you burn the bones of regular sacrifices? There's a yad for nicer. We say that it was emptied before it became nicer. It was never a yad for nicer. Why by the Korban Pesach do you burn it? We say that it probably was nicer. In other words, the difference between the Korban Pesach and other Korbanos is the presumption of when the bones were cracked open. And the presumption is that the bones of the Korban Pesach were cracked only after it was puzzled. That means that these bones are yad for nicer. The Brisa says you have to burn the bones of the Korban Pesach, even when it's cracked open. Even when there's no nicer there. Yeah. Okay.
Is there a commentary with a rationale for why broken bones are treated differently by the Pesach than other korbanot?
So because only the Korban Pesach has the halach of you're not allowed to break it.
Right, but I'm asking, is there some discussion that you're aware of?
Why by a Korban Pesach should you not break bones? Yeah. As from a kid, I always understood that it's because we're supposed to act wealthy. You know, the Seder, we behave like rich men. We also behave like slaves, but we have contradictory. behaviors. And that's part of the manashtana. But the manashtana is why are you contradicting your behaviors? But you don't break a bone because we're rich. We don't need to crack it open and get out the last batches. That's what I understood. It must have been a first grade teacher or something. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, that's what I have in my head, way back from the coloring pages. Okay. Yeah, the pasuk says don't break the bones. Naftali's asking the Korban Pesach. Naftali's asking why, why by the Korban Pesach not, and the other Korbanos yes. Yeah, just what's the background? So Hachav Mayaskin, Rav Zvid has another teretz. We're talking about why you don't have to burn bones of sacrifices and you do have to burn bones of a Korban Pesach. So Rav Zvid Amar Hachav Mayaskin, here what are we dealing with? Going Shematzan Tziburim Tziburim Umihen Chalutzim. This is a very interesting halacha. What's coming out from this is that normally, whenever you're able to verify what the situation is, anything that you're able to verify, you're supposed to verify. You're supposed to do your due diligence and figure out what's going on over here. If you're able to check, you check. That's here. He has a pile of bones. He looks at the top ones, and yeah, they're emptied. They're cracked open and they're emptied. So, what is his presumption? What does he assume is going on with the bones underneath? Does he have to go through all of them and check if they're all cracked open and empty? So, atzamis kachim dein ben mishum shvir setzim. When it comes to bones of regular sacrifices, where there was no prohibition of breaking the bones, so then l'kula b'chalitzlo, all of them are emptied. The guy opened all of them and he ate all of it. And you don't have to burn it. You don't have to check for it. But when it comes to the Korban Pesach, where there is a prohibition, maybe these were broken open. The other ones weren't open. You have to go check to see if they were open. So here what we're dealing with is a presumption. Now the question on this Gemara is, 1 second. Why don't I have to check for the other ones? Maybe there's nicer there. Maybe I should have to check for it. There must be some leniency based on the logic that he probably got it out because he was able to get it out. So he probably got it out, and we don't have to assume that he didn't get it out. But by the Korban Pesach, where it's much more complicated, he can't break it before. It was probably there, and it became nicer, and therefore it needs to be burnt. So, are we saying that Shemesh Nicer is a problem? According to Rav Zvid, when were these bones broken? After the fact. According to Rav Zvid, you don't have to burn it after the fact. Apparently, Rav Zvid holds that Shemesh Nicer is nothing. That's the difference, Rav Zvid and Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Nachman Bar Yitzchak said Shemesh Nicer is a problem, and we presume that the bones of a Korban Pesach was Shemesh Nicer. Rav Zvid comes along and says Shemesh Nicer is not a problem. The question is there marrow still inside? Do I have to go check all of it? And the answer is yes. But by the other one, I don't have to check because I presume he took it out. Okay. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav. Rav Yehuda says the name of Rav. Kol Hagidin Basar. All sinews are considered flesh. They're considered meat. It means you go to a restaurant, you order meat, it gives you the sinews. Can't complain. This is also meat. So Chutz migidei tzaver, except if they give you the sinews that are from the neck. The neck, that's the sinews on the neck would be too tough. It's not considered really meat. It's probably ligaments or something. I don't know. Tanan was taught in the Mishnah. The Mishnah says that the bones, the sinews, and nicer have to be burnt not on the 15th, but on the 16th. One of the things that we mentioned were sinews. Now, hani gidin hechidami. What sinews? Ile megidei basar. If you say that it's meat, edible ones, nechlinus, why didn't you eat them? You see, it didn't tell me that atzamis, gidim, and nicer that were all left over need to be burnt. It says atzamis automatically need to be burnt. It's talking about atzamis that have the marrow inside. The gidim automatically need to be burnt. The nicer is puzzle, needs to be burnt. But it's not gidim that have a second prohibition on them, that it's nicer. The gidim, it's impossible. It must become nicer, and that atzamis must become nicer. So because you can't get it out, and I gidim because probably you can't eat it, so it becomes nicer. The question is, if you can't eat it, why is it nicer? It's not edible. If it's edible, so why didn't you eat it? The taisa, let's say it is edible, but you just happened to leave it over. You didn't eat it. It says hainu nicer. It didn't say that if you ate that nicer of this and nicer of that and nicer of this cut and that cut of meat, all of those nicers. It gives you one category of nicer, and that's nicer. So it happens to be if the gidim were left over, so you don't have to say and gidim that are nicer. You don't have to say that. It's nicer. Ela pshita gidei tzaver must be talking about. Yeah, but now it says ela pshita gidei tzaver. It must be that it wasn't edible. Now iyamit bishleima basar nino. If you say that it's flesh, it's this tough sinews, but nevertheless somehow it's still considered flesh. Amtalachi by sreifa. That's why you have to burn it. Ela iyamit lav basar nino. But if you say that it's not flesh, lamlu sreifas, why are you burning? Why are you burning that? You don't burn the hide, right? You don't have to burn the teeth, or whatever. You know, that's not those are not edible parts. Right. The Gemara gives an amazing teretz. Amar of Chisda. Look at this teretz. Referring to the Gidanasha. And it's according to Rabbi Yehuda. Yeah. No one ever thought of this. What do you do with the Gidanasha, the Korban Pesach? I have an obligation to eat the Korban Pesach. What do you do with the Gidanasha? So, well, the Gidanasha you're not going to eat. The question is, why not? I think there's a Shagas Aryeh that discusses. The Gidanasha is clearly a negative command. It's clearly a negative command. Korban Pesach is a positive command. That should just knock that right off, right? It says eat the Korban Pesach, and there's a Gidanasha there. Well, positive overrules the negative, right? Yeah, that's a Shagas Aryeh. Here we're dealing with something else. Here we're dealing with a gid that wasn't eaten. But was it supposed to be eaten? So it's going according to Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda, there's only one Gidanasha, the right leg or the left leg. I don't know which one it is, but only one of them is Aser. We're not going to eat both of them. But really it was only one. So v'hadas machras shel yamin. Logically, it's the right one. That's the Aser one. Now, when we learned this sugi in Chulin, so over there was a discussion when it says v'hadas machras. Is it das Torah machras or is it das noite machras? Is what Rabbi is saying that it's definitely the right one, or is he saying that let's assume that it's the right one, but it's logical? It's not definite. That was a question over there. Now, what's coming out by us is that because he's not going to eat the Gid Hanasha because of the doubt of which one it is. So really, if one of them, it could become nicer. One of them could be nicer. I guess the actual gid is not nicer, but the other one, that's the doubt. So if that's the case, then we're understanding over here why, when the Mishnah says Ha'atzamis v'hagidin, it's referring to the gid anasha, because that I have an inherent problem that I don't know what to do. I don't want to eat it. It could be the gid anasha, and I have to just leave it till it becomes nicer, and then I'll burn it. So it's automatically nicer. That's what it means, as opposed to nicer regular, which is not automatically nicer. It's just left over. The only problem is that we did not have clarity in the Gemara Chulin of what Rabbi Yehuda meant. The Gemara now says, "Velativshet esfukim esafkele Rabbi Yehuda." It must be that the pshat in that Gemara in Rabbi Yehuda is that Rabbi Yehuda, when he says Hadas Machras, he doesn't actually know. He's just saying that it would seem to say the imifshet pshitale, because if he was answer telling me Hadas Machras that it's only the right and not the left, so why does he not eat the left and throw away the right? There's no nicer. Lamali Streifa, what do you have to burn anything for? It must be that we now have, based on our Mishnah, we have a teretz to what Rabbi Yehuda held. Our Mishnah is Rabbi Yehuda. It says Gidin need to be burnt. Why? We now have a pshat in the Gemara. The Gemara didn't know what Rabbi Yehuda Shita was. Now we know, based on our Mishnah. Ravika Bar Chinna tells me, actually, Rabbi Yehuda does know. The right one is the Gid Anasha, the left one is not. So then throw away the right one and eat the left one. Why are you telling me that I have to burn it? So, this is called the Daichek. The case of the Mishnah is when I don't know which Gid was from the right and which one was from the left. That's why I have to burn it. That's the whole Mishnah. What's the case of Gidin? Is when I confuse the right one with the left one. It's a funny Rashi here. Rashi says, it was like, Rashi is explaining the word hukru l'b'seif nesarvel. It says you recognize them and then they got mixed up. It says the hukru is lav dafka. It doesn't mean that you actually recognize them at one point. One was on the right and one was on the left. He says everyone knows the difference. There's no one that doesn't know the difference between his right and his left. Everyone knows the difference between right and left. Yeah, I don't need to say hukru l'b'seif nesarvel. It was just nisarvu. They got confused. They got confused, and that's why one of them you're supposed to eat and one of them you're supposed to burn. You can't eat either of them because you can't tell. Ravashi says we're dealing with the fat of the Gid Anasha. The fat of the Gid Anasha is a rabbinic prohibition. This is a real question. Why does the Raisa of Korban Pesach not override the Shuman Agid? That's a real question. Shuman Agid is rabbinic law that says you don't eat the Shuman Agid either. There's a fat that sort of goes around that area. The Tanya Shuman Mutter V'Yisrael Kadesh Mim Noigim V'Nisser. The Shuman is actually mutter, but the Jewish people are more strict and they don't eat it. It's unbelievable. They're not eating the Shuman Agid of the Korban Pesach. The Raisa it's mutter. So when it says in the Mishnah Gidin, you have to burn. Why are you burning the Gid? You eat the one that's kosher, or if they're both, you don't eat either of them, and it's not nicer because you're not allowed to eat it. Nicer is food that was supposed to be eaten. This is not supposed to be eaten. So the Gemara answer is actually midaraisa. It is supposed to be eaten. It's midarabanan that it's not eaten, and so therefore it becomes nicer, and they burn it. It's just amazing that we didn't say that the biblical law overrides the rabbinic Shuman Agid. Must be the Rabbanan were so strong that they made a gzeira they made a gzeira that you don't eat from the Karban Pesach. I mean, there's a prohibition to leave over meat from the Karban Pesach, but the Rabbanan are so strong that you're not allowed to eat. It's really something. Okay. Ravina Amar, yeah, the people that discuss the power of the Rabbanan, this is an amazing raya, that the strength of the Rabbanan. They discuss this, we mentioned this once before, about tefillin. Tefillin at night, really tefillin is at night. We don't wear tefillin at night for whatever. You're supposed to wear tefillin at night. Yeah, there's machlekes, but according to the opinion that holds that you're supposed to wear tefillin at night, and the rabbi said not to because the body isn't clean or whatever. So, if someone does wear tefillin at night, does he at least fulfill the biblical law? And we quoted Rabbeinu Yaina, the Talmidei Rabbeinu Yaina, say no. The rabbi said not to. There's no mitzvah. So here also, the rabbi said not to. There's no Korban Pesach on that, but it was still edible, so you have to burn it. Okay, Ravina Amar Bechitzin. Ravina says that there's two parts to the Gid Anasha. Yehuda Mishmul, Damar Yehuda Mishmul, Beis Gidinin, Pnimi Asamach Latzim, Aser V'Chayavan Allah, Chitzin Asamach L'Basar, Aser Vein Chayavan Allah. He gives me the same answer, basically, except with a different detail. Rabbinically, we don't eat either of the Gidin. There's two Gidin there. One is more inner, closer to the bone, and one is outer. And the one that I really is not the real Gid Anasha, that I should be allowed to eat, but the rabbis told me not to, and so therefore when it comes to nicer, I burn it. Okay. The Mishnah said that you burn it on the 16th. Unless the 16th is Shabbos, then you have to wait till the 17th. The Gemara says, why do you have to burn it on the 16th? I think the quote is a mistake. It says Chal Tazayin. Chal Tazayin is when the Mishnah tells me that Chal Tazayin is Shabbos, I burn it on the 17th. But the Gemara is not going to discuss that. The Gemara is going to discuss why don't I burn it on the 16th. So I think the quote is a mistake. I don't know if I haven't known Gemara, but it could be the other Gemaras change the quote. That's a printer. There's no problem. The printer put that in to help me see what part of the Mishnah. Why do we say that you can't burn it on Yom Tov? Let the assay of Be'if Tisreifu that says that you have to burn the nicer. Let that push off the lice assay of Malachas Yom Tov. Called Malach Lisasa. It's a good question. No, let the positive command push off the negative command. I have a positive command to burn nicer, and I have a negative command don't to work on Yom Tov. Now I'm allowed to cook on Yom Tov, but that's only for things that I need. This is kachim, this is not something that I need. It's not a nefesh. It's another law that I have to get rid of nicer. So the Gemara is asking, but 1 second, I have a law that says to get rid of it, based to strifle, and you have a negative prohibition, and always the positive prohibition, the positive mitzvah pushes off the negative prohibition. It overrides. The positive is stronger. So, what are the possible answers over here? Possible answers is that either I have a special lima that tells me not to burn it on Yom Tov, or I have I say that anything that could be done at a later date doesn't push off Yom Tov because it could be done later. Or I'm going to say that somewhere there's actually a negative prohibition, a positive prohibition somewhere in Yom Tov also that tells me it. There are three possibilities the Gemara is going to say. That tells me not to do work. The positive that tells me that I have to rest. We'll see. So Amar Chizkiya v'chein Tana de Chizkiya. Chizkiya says, and it was also taught in the yeshiva of Chizkiya, Amar Kra, Leisasir Mino ad Baker, Vanesim Mino ad Baker based the Sreifel. Don't leave over until morning, and anything that is left over until morning needs to be burned. Shein Talmud Laim Arad Biker, it doesn't have to say the second time, it's repetitive. Right? Ma Talmud Laim Arad Biker. Why does it have to say a second time? It says don't lean over till Boker, till Biker, till the morning. Anything that is should be burned. Why does it have to say? And anything that is left over till the morning, I have an extra till the morning there. It's telling me that I burn it on the second morning, not on Yom Tov. So I have a special pasuk that tells me not to. Okay, it's a good teretz. Abaya Amar Kra Eila Shabbos b'Shabbat v'Leila Schol b'Shabbos v'Leila Schol b'Yom Tov. I have another pasuk. It says that I don't bring a weekday sacrifice on Yom Tov, and if I don't bring a weekday sacrifice, for sure I don't burn a puzzle sacrifice on Yom Tov. Okay, I can't even bring a real sacrifice on Yom Tov. I can't even offer. Right. For sure, this was a weekday sacrifice. This sacrifice was offered yesterday on the 14th, and now you want to burn it on Yom Tov. I wasn't even allowed to offer it on Yom Tov. Now you're gonna tell me that I should be able to burn the puzzle part on Yom Tov, even if it was kosher and it was being offered. I wouldn't be able to put the limbs on the mizbeach. Rava Amar Kra Hulabadi Yasalachem Hu V'lei Machshira. It says it alone, which means Eichel Nefesh, you're allowed to do, but not preparations for Eichel Nefesh, which means things that could have been done yesterday, you're not allowed to do. Different types of grinding and things that could have been yesterday that didn't need to be done today. Levadai, when it says alone, it's a Kal V'chaimer that should tell me that I should be able to do Mila Shlei Bismana. It goes like this. The Kal V'chaimer, we've had this Kal V'chaimer before. It said that Mila pushes off Tzuras. Because really, you're not allowed to cut off Tzuras. If there's Tzuras, you're not allowed to remove it. Skin Tzuras. You can't cut it out. However, if there's Tzuras on the Arla, you're allowed to do the bris. That means Mila is stronger than Tzuras. And Tzuras pushes off Avodah. You're not allowed to do the Avodah if someone has Tzuras. So Mila is stronger than Tzuras, and Tzuras is stronger than Avodah. And Avodah pushes off Shabbos. That means Mila should for sure push off Shabbos. Mila is stronger than Tzuras, and Tzuras is stronger than Avodah. Avodah is stronger than Shabbos. So the Mila is for sure stronger than Shabbos, right? Wasn't that Aristotle's thing? Okay. So Mila pushes off Shabbos. But what we're trying to get over here is Mila Shlei Bismana as well. What we say no. Mila Shlei Bismana doesn't push off Shabbos. That's what we learned from the pasuk. That means someone that converts, or maybe a child that the father didn't give him the bris on the right time, or maybe was ill, he didn't get the bris on the right time, so it doesn't push off Shabbos. So what we're going to say is like this: Kudshim, burning Kudshim is like Mila Shlei Bismana, because once it doesn't have a designated time specifically, it needs to be burned right now. So then, like Mila Shlei Bismana, Mila Bismana had a time when it's supposed to be performed. Mila Shlei Bismana is also Shlei Bismana. If I do it today, I do it tomorrow, it's still a Mila Shlei Bismana. So Kudshim, I had a time when I was supposed to eat it, granted. But now when I have a time when it's puzzled, so it's puzzled tomorrow also. So it doesn't push off Shabbos. It says in the pasuk Shabbos sign that it's a rest. Now that tells me that's a positive command that I need to rest on Yom Tov. So therefore, I'm not going to say that the positive command of burning the apostle carbon, or burning nicer, is going to push off the negative prohibition of don't work on Yom Tov, because in that negative prohibition is also a positive command that I have to rest. So positive can't push off a positive and the negative. It can only push off a plain negative.